What if I told you? There is a house, still standing today, where 7 people walked in and never walked out. Not a horror movie. Not a legend passed down by nervous grandparents. A real house, with a real address. In a real American town where real families once bought groceries, coached Little League, and waved to their neighbors on Sunday mornings. A house where the doors still open, the lights still flicker on, and according to people who have gotten close enough, you can still hear sounds coming from inside. Welcome to Story Labs. And tonight, we are going inside. The town of Harlow Creek, West Virginia sits in a valley so deep that Google Maps still can't render it correctly. Population, 412. 1 gas station. 1 diner. 1 church with a cracked bell that hasn't rung since 1983. And 1 house. Locals call it the Aldric House, named after the family that built it in 1902. A 3-story Victorian structure at the end of Pembroke Lane, painted a shade of gray that seems to change depending on the time of day. In the morning, it looks almost white. By late afternoon, it turns the color of ash. And at night, people say it disappears into the dark so completely that you could drive right past it and never know it was there. The Aldric House has been empty for 41 years. But here is the thing that nobody in Harlow Creek will tell you right away. The thing they save for after you've had a second cup of coffee and they've decided you're not a reporter or a thrill seeker or someone who's going to make things worse. The house isn't abandoned because no one wants it. It's abandoned because everyone who has tried to stay has vanished. Let me take you back to the beginning. Edmund Aldric, a railroad surveyor from Pittsburgh, purchases 12 acres of land in the Harlow Creek Valley. He is 34 years old, newly married to a woman named Clara, and by all accounts, deeply, profoundly happy. He builds the house himself, with the help of 6 local laborers, over the course of 18 months. 3 stories, 9 rooms, a wraparound porch, a cellar. Neighbors who watched the house go up described it as beautiful. Ambitious. A little too big for just 2 people, they said, but Edmund always smiled at that. He and Clara were planning a large family. He had dreams. The Aldric family moved in on October 3, 1903. By October 31st of that same year, Edmund Aldric was gone. Not dead. Not moved away. Gone. Vanished. As if the earth had opened up and swallowed him whole. Clara reported him missing on November 1st. She told the county sheriff that she had gone to bed at her usual hour, and when she woke up, Edmund's side of the bed was empty. His coat was still on the hook by the door. His boots were still on the mat. His pocket watch, which he never went anywhere without, was sitting on the nightstand. Everything was exactly where it should be. Except Edmund. The sheriff searched the property for 3 days. They combed the woods, dragged the nearby creek, knocked on every door within 5 miles. Nothing. No footprints in the mud outside the windows. No sign of struggle. No note. No reason. Edmund Aldric had simply ceased to exist. Clara stayed in the house for another 6 months. Friends begged her to leave. Her sister came from Ohio and practically dragged her out by the hand. But Clara refused. She said she was waiting. She said Edmund would come back. She said the house felt like he was still there. Then, on a Tuesday morning in April of 1904, Clara Aldric disappeared too. Same story. Same nothing. Coat on the hook. Boots on the mat. Cup of tea on the kitchen table, still warm when her sister found it. And that was the first time the people of Harlow Creek started to whisper. Now, you might be thinking, okay, tragic, mysterious, but people disappear. It happens. There are explanations, even when we can't find them. Fair enough. Let's keep going. The house sat empty for 11 years. No one was brave enough, or perhaps foolish enough, to move in. It passed through 3 owners on paper, none of whom ever set foot inside. It was a bad omen, people said. A cursed plot of land. Leave it alone. Then came 1915, and a man named Roy Hester. Roy was not from Harlow Creek. He was from Maryland, and he had never heard the story of the Aldrics. He was a schoolteacher, recently widowed, looking for a fresh start in a quiet place. He saw the property advertised in a land registry notice, bought it sight unseen for $40, and arrived in Harlow Creek on a Wednesday afternoon in June with 2 suitcases and a box of books. The locals tried to warn him. Roy Hester smiled politely, thanked them for their concern, and moved into the Aldric house that same evening. He lasted 9 days. On the morning of June 21st, 1915, Roy Hester was gone. His suitcases were still unpacked. His box of books was still sitting in the hallway, unopened. And on the kitchen table, a single sheet of paper with 4 words written on it in Roy's handwriting. The words were, "It knows I'm here. Now the hair on the back of your neck is standing up. I can tell. But here is what makes the Aldric house different from every other haunted house story you've ever heard. This is not a story about ghosts. It is a story about something far, far stranger. And it starts with a woman named Dr. Patricia Weil, a forensic researcher from the University of Virginia who arrived in Harlow Creek in 1986 and made a discovery so disturbing that the university buried her report for 16 years. A discovery that explains, in horrifying detail, not just what happened to Edmund and Clara Aldric and Roy Hester, but to the 4 others who disappeared from that house over the following decades. A discovery that answers the question every person in Harlow Creek has been too afraid to ask out loud. What is inside that house, and why does it keep taking people? Stay with us, because we are only just getting started. Before we talk about Dr. Patricia Weil, we need to talk about the others, because Edmund and Clara Aldric and Roy Hester the schoolteacher were only the beginning. Between 1903 and 1981, 4 more people walked into the Aldric house and were never seen again. And each disappearance was stranger than the last. The Great Depression is grinding America into dust. A drifter named Samuel Cord passes through Harlow Creek looking for work. He is 32 years old, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who has slept under bridges and survived worse than most. He notices the Aldric house sitting empty at the end of Pembroke Lane. He asks around about it. The locals tell him the story, expecting him to move on. Samuel laughs. He says he slept in worse places than a haunted house. He says ghosts don't scare a man who's got nothing left to lose. He breaks a window on the ground floor and climbs inside. 3 days later, a 12-year-old boy named Tommy Greer creeps up to the house on a dare from his friends. He calls out for Samuel through the broken window. No answer. He peers inside. Samuel's bedroll is laid out neatly on the parlor floor. His boots are arranged side by side next to it, as if he had simply stepped out of them. His cigarettes, his lighter, his small leather wallet containing $3 and a photograph of a woman who might have been his mother. All of it left behind. The only thing different from the previous disappearances was this. On the parlor wall, scratched deep into the plaster with what investigators later determined was a fingernail, a single word. Underneath. Nobody knew what it meant. The sheriff at the time, a practical man named Earl Boone, ordered the cellar searched. 2 of his deputies went down with lanterns. They came back up pale and sweating and refused to discuss what they had seen down there in any detail. One of them, a man named Gerald Finch, resigned from the department the following week and never spoke about the Aldric house again for the rest of his life. Earl Boone boarded up the cellar door himself with 16 planks of lumber and 4 iron bolts. He told the town the cellar was empty. He was lying. We know this now because, 50 years later, his granddaughter found his personal diary in a box in her attic. In an entry dated November 14, 1931, Earl Boone wrote the following, and I want you to listen to these words very carefully. The geometry of that cellar is not right. I don't know how else to say it. Gerald and I both measured. The outside of the house is 62 feet long. The cellar should be close to the same. But we walked 40 feet in and hit a wall. 22 feet of space is missing. There is no wall on the outside of the house where that wall should be. I have walked around this building 4 times, and I cannot find where those 22 feet went. Gerald wants to start pulling walls. I told him no. Some things you leave alone. God forgive me, but some things you leave alone. 22 missing feet. Let that sit with you for a moment. The next disappearance came in 1947. A young married couple, James and Helen Morrow, newly arrived in Harlow Creek. James had taken a job at a lumber mill 6 miles up the valley. They needed cheap housing fast. The Aldric house, by this point barely maintained by a distant heir who had never visited, was available for almost nothing. Their friends warned them. Their co-workers warned them. The woman at the general store warned them twice. James and Helen Morrow smiled and nodded and signed the lease anyway. They were young. They were in love. They didn't believe in old ghost stories. They moved in on March 3, 1947. Helen disappeared on March 9th. James disappeared on March 10th. 6 days. That was all it took. A neighbor, alerted by the sudden silence from the house, notified the sheriff. When deputies entered, they found the dinner table still set for 2. Food still on the plates, dried and curled at the edges. 2 chairs pushed out from the table, as if James and Helen had simply stood up mid-meal and walked away. The back door was standing open. In the yard beyond the back door, the grass was pressed flat in a perfect circle, 20 feet across, as if something enormous had sat there, or landed there, or risen from the ground there. In the center of the circle, a single woman's shoe. Helen Morrow's shoe. Now here is where this story starts to shift. where it stops feeling like folklore and starts feeling like something else entirely. After the Morrow disappearances, a young journalist named Calvin Price from the Charleston Gazette drove up to Harlow Creek to write a piece on the house. He spent 2 weeks interviewing residents, reviewing the sparse official records, and walking the property from the outside. He published his article in May of 1947 under the headline, "The Curse of Pembroke Lane." It ran on page 7. It was not widely read, but Calvin Price did something no one else had done before him. He drew a map. He mapped every disappearance chronologically. He noted the dates, the details, the recurring elements, the clothes left behind, the food still warm, the total absence of any sign of a struggle, the scratched word on the plaster wall, the missing cellar footage, the circle in the grass. And he noticed a pattern. Every single disappearance had occurred within the first 11 days of someone moving in. Not on day 12, not on day 15, not on day 30, always within 11 days, often between day 6 and day 9. Calvin Price wrote in his private notes, which his daughter donated to the West Virginia Historical Archive in 2003. It is as if the house requires a settling-in period, as if it is studying its occupants, learning them, and then, once it knows them well enough, it takes them. He never published those notes. He was too afraid of what they implied. The last disappearance before the house was permanently condemned. Her name was Mara Okafor. She was 26 years old, a graduate student in architectural history from Ohio State University. She was researching Victorian-era construction methods in rural Appalachia and had specifically sought out the Aldric house because of its unusual design features. Unlike every other person who had entered that house, Mara Okafor was not trying to live there. She was not desperate, or homeless, or naive. She was a professional, doing research, with a methodology and a plan. What the ground-penetrating radar revealed beneath the Aldric house was, the university's words, not mine, a subsurface network of constructed passages inconsistent with any known architectural tradition or building technique available in the early 20th century. Translation: there is something built under that house that should not exist. That could not have been built by Edmund Aldric and 6 laborers in 1902, or at any other known point in the property's history. The network was vast. The radar couldn't map its full extent. Every time they thought they had found the edge of it, there was more. It extended in every direction. Under the yard, under the road, under neighboring properties. It extended, according to Dr. Weil's most conservative estimate, at least 300 feet in every direction from the foundation of the house. 300 feet of tunnels, rooms, and passages, built by no one, belonging to no era, hiding under a small gray Victorian house at the end of Pembroke Lane in a valley so quiet you can hear the creak from every room. And then Dr. Weil found the one thing that made her shut down the investigation entirely, pull her team out in the middle of the night, and spend the next decade trying to get the university to let her publish what she had found. She found a room, one large room, directly beneath the center of the house, that the radar had somehow missed in its initial sweeps. A room filled with personal belongings. Coats, boots, pocket watches, cigarettes and lighters, leather wallets, women's shoes, cameras, notebooks, all of it arranged with extraordinary care, cataloged almost, as if someone or something had been collecting these objects for a very long time. Every missing person's belongings, gathered in one place, organized like a museum collection of the people who had vanished. But the belongings were not what drove Dr. Patricia Weil from that house at 2 in the morning with her team barely able to keep pace with her. It was the sounds she heard coming from behind the walls of that room. The soft, rhythmic sounds. The sounds of breathing. Breathing. Not one set of breaths. Not 2. Multiple rhythms. Overlapping, distinct from one another, coming from every direction behind those walls. Slow. Steady. Alive. Dr. Patricia Weil stood in that underground room at 2 in the morning, surrounded by the collected belongings of 7 missing people, and listened to something breathe at her from inside the walls. And then she ran. She ran, and she didn't stop running, and she didn't look back, and she didn't speak for 3 days after she emerged from that house. Her research assistant, a 23-year-old named David Cho, later told a podcast interviewer that when Dr. Weil finally did speak, sitting at a diner table in Charleston with a cup of coffee going cold in her hands, the first words out of her mouth were not about the tunnels, or the doors, or the belongings. She said, they were breathing in patterns, regular intervals, all of them synchronized, like they had been trained. David Cho said he didn't sleep properly for a year after that. Now, I know what you were thinking. I know because I thought it too, The first time I fell down this rabbit hole at 2 in the morning with the lights on and every door in my apartment locked. You are thinking, are they alive? Are Edmund Aldric, who disappeared in 1903, and Clara, and Roy Hester the schoolteacher, and Samuel the drifter who laughed at ghost stories, are any of them, somehow, still alive inside those walls? It is the question that has consumed every person who has seriously studied the Aldrich house. And the honest answer, the only intellectually honest answer I can give you, is that nobody knows. But here is what we do know. And this is where the story stops being a mystery and becomes something genuinely, deeply disturbing. In 2002, 16 years after Dr. Weil's investigation, the University of Virginia quietly released her report. Not in a journal, not with a press release. They simply posted it to an internal archive database with minimal metadata, the academic equivalent of hiding something in plain sight. A researcher named Tom Bellard, who ran a now-defunct paranormal investigation blog, found it by accident while searching for something else entirely. He read it in one sitting. He posted about it. The post went mildly viral in certain corners of the internet. And then Bellard did something remarkable. He contacted Dr. Weil directly. She was 71 years old by then, retired, living in Vermont. He expected her to decline. He expected a form letter from a lawyer telling him to drop the subject. Instead, Patricia Weil picked up the phone and talked to him for 4 hours. What she told him in that conversation forms the core of everything we think we understand about the Aldrich house today. Tom Bellard recorded the call, had it transcribed, and published the full transcript on his blog in 2003, shortly before the blog went dark and Bellard himself stopped posting without explanation. The transcript still exists. It has been archived, and it contains, buried in 4 hours of conversation, 3 revelations that change everything. Revelation 1. Dr. Weil told Bellard that her ground-penetrating radar had detected something unusual in the soil composition directly beneath the house's foundation. Not in the tunnels themselves, but in the earth between the tunnels. A mineral compound she had sent to 3 separate laboratories for analysis. All 3 labs came back with the same answer. They couldn't identify it. Not trace amounts of an unusual compound. Not a rare mineral variant. Flat out could not identify it. It did not match any known natural mineral. It did not match any known synthetic material. It was, as one lab put it in writing to Dr. Weil, a substance of indeterminate origin with properties inconsistent with any cataloged material. One of the properties that made it so difficult to classify? It generated a low-frequency electromagnetic field, continuous, stable, emanating upward through the foundation of the house and into every room. A field that, at prolonged exposure, Dr. Weil believed could affect human neurological function. Specifically, the regions of the brain governing spatial perception, time awareness, and the fear response. In other words, the house, by its very nature, by what it was built on or built over, could alter the perception of anyone inside it. Make distances seem different. Make time move strangely. Suppress the instinct to flee. And keep people compliant. Revelation 2. Dr. Weil had gone back. Not officially. Not with a team. Alone. In the summer of 1993, 7 years after the investigation that had broken her. She had gone back because she could not let go of the breathing. She spent one night in the house. Ground floor only, she told Bellard. She would not go near the cellar. She sat in the old parlor with a sleeping bag and a battery-powered lantern and a tape recorder running continuously. She recorded 11 hours of audio. 10 hours and 47 minutes of that audio were unremarkable. Wind. Settling wood. The distant sound of the creek. The last 13 minutes were not. At the 10:47 mark, voices began. Not outside the house. Not from any identifiable direction. Woven into the ambient sound of the building itself, as if the walls were producing them. Faint. Fragmented. Occasionally resolving into something close to words. Dr. Weil told Bellard she had listened to those 13 minutes over 400 times over the following decade. She had identified, she believed, at least 4 distinct voices. One of them, a low male voice that appeared repeatedly throughout the recording, seemed to be saying a single word on a loop. The word was a name. Clara. Revelation 3. This is the one that keeps me up at night. This is the one I want you to sit with when this video is over and you are lying in the dark wondering whether to look up the address of a house in West Virginia. Dr. Weil told Tom Bellard that, in the final hour of her night in the house, she had experienced something she had no scientific framework for explaining. She had felt, with absolute and complete certainty, that she was not alone in the room. Not a sound. Not a visual. Not a cold spot or a flickering light, or any of the classic markers of a haunting. Something more interior than that. A knowledge, settling into her like cold water, that something in that house was aware of her, was oriented toward her, was, in some way she could not articulate, pleased that she had come back. And then she had felt, for approximately 4 minutes, an emotion she described to Bellard as the most complex emotional experience of her life. Not fear, not peace, something in between and beyond both. She described it as recognition, as if something in that house knew her, had been waiting specifically for her, recognized her the way you recognize an old friend across a crowded room, with a warmth that bypasses language entirely. She said that for those 4 minutes, she did not want to leave. She said that if her timer had not gone off, if she had not set a physical alarm to break whatever was happening to her, she genuinely believed she would have walked to the cellar door. She would have gone down. She would not have come back up. Patricia Weil died in 2009, at 78, in her home in Vermont. Peacefully, according to her obituary. Surrounded by family. In her personal effects, her daughter found a manila envelope sealed with tape and labeled, in Dr. Weil's handwriting, "Do not open until you are ready." Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper. A letter, addressed to no one. Undated. Her daughter published it in a memorial blog post that has since been taken down, but not before it was screenshotted and shared and archived in a dozen different places online. The letter read, in full, "I have spent 23 years trying to explain what is in that house using the tools available to my discipline. I cannot do it. What I can tell you is this. The house is not evil. I want to be very clear about that. I spent a long time believing it was, and I was wrong. What it is lonely. Profoundly, catastrophically lonely, in a way that I think none of us are equipped to understand. It takes people not out of malice, but out of need. A need so vast and so old that the distinction between taking and keeping has ceased to exist for it. If you are reading this and you are thinking about going to Harlow Creek, I am not going to tell you not to go. I know what it's like to be drawn there. I know that pull doesn't respond to reason. I will only tell you this. Do not go alone. Do not go at night. And if you get inside and something in you stops wanting to leave, do not wait to understand why. Run. Run and don't look back, the way I did. The way I have been grateful every single day that I did. Because the thing in that house is patient. It has been patient for over 100 years. And it is very, very good at making you feel like you are finally, exactly where you belong. The Aldric house still stands. Pembroke Lane still exists on county maps, though the road has not been maintained in decades and is barely passable by car. The house itself was condemned by Harlow Creek Township in 1982, following the Morrow Okafor disappearance, and carries a standing trespass notice that has been renewed every 5 years since. It has not stopped people from going. In the years since Tom Bellard's blog post circulated, at least a dozen urban explorers, paranormal investigators, and curiosity seekers have documented attempts to enter or approach the property. Most turn back at the end of Pembroke Lane. Some report that as they near the house, they experience a sudden and powerful reluctance to continue, combined with an equally powerful reluctance to leave. A contradiction that one explorer described as wanting to go forward and backward simultaneously until you feel like you might come apart. A small number have gotten inside. Their footage is always the same. Steady at first. Methodical. Then, at some point between the 10-minute and 40-minute mark, the camera starts to drift. The person filming stops narrating. They begin moving through the house in silence, slowly, as if listening to something just beneath the threshold of the microphone's range. In every piece of footage, at some point, the person pauses at the top of the cellar stairs. In every piece of footage, they eventually turn away. Every piece of footage that has been made public ends the same way. The person leaving the house, getting back to their car, sitting in silence for a long time before driving away. Every piece of footage that has been made public. There are, according to people who track this corner of the internet closely, at least 3 sets of footage that were begun in that house and never completed. 3 cameras recovered from the property by county officials, containing partial recordings that end, not at the cellar stairs, not at the front door, not in any room of the house. They end mid-frame, mid-step, mid-breath, as if the person filming simply stopped. 7 names scratched into 7 doors in a corridor that should not exist beneath a house in a valley that maps can't render correctly. 7 people who walked in and never walked out. 7 sets of belongings arranged in a room below the earth with the care and precision of a collection. A memory, a tribute, or a comfort. Because that is what stays with me after all of it. After the electromagnetic fields and the missing footage and Dr. Weil's letter. After Edmund and Clara and Roy and Samuel and James and Helen and Mara. After all the science and all the mystery and all the years of unanswered questions. What stays with me is the word she used. Lonely. Not evil. Not malicious. Not a monster. Not a demon. Not a gateway to somewhere dark and unknowable. Just lonely. Something in that house, in those walls, in that impossible ground beneath it, has been reaching for company for over 100 years. Reaching the only way it knows how. Taking what it finds, holding it close, breathing in sync with it in the dark, and waiting, patiently, endlessly, hopefully waiting, for someone to finally reach back. I don't know if that makes it better. Honestly, I think it makes it worse. The last entry ever posted on Tom Bellard's blog, dated 6 weeks after his conversation with Dr. Patricia Weil, was 3 sentences long. It said, "I'm going to Harlow Creek. I have to see it for myself. I'll post when I'm back." Tom Bellard never posted again. No one has been able to locate him since. That's the story of the house that made people disappear. 7 people. 1 house. 1 question that nobody has ever been able to answer with certainty. And 1 more question, the one I'll leave you with as you sit there in the glow of your screen, maybe in the dark, maybe with the volume a little lower than you'd like it to be. If something had been alone for 120 years, and it finally found a way to tell you it was lonely, would you stay? This has been Storylabs. If this story found you tonight and wouldn't let you go, that's exactly how it's supposed to feel. Subscribe. Stay close. Because we have more stories waiting for you in the dark, and we are just getting started. Sleep well. If you can.